Which is, what did you miss about leaving home? Well, Tammy says, I missed the magic basket in the bathroom. You know the one in which you put your dirty clothes to have them returned clean and folded on the end of your bed 2 days later.
Yes, I know that basket well now, and it's not me that's putting the stuff under.
It was a magic basket, Tammy says. Okay, finally, an article in the New York Times caught our attention here at the panel. We're all familiar with seagulls snatching foods away. You might leave your sandwich or chips beside you, and hey presto, unsuspecting gulls sneaks gone. Various solutions have been proposed, such as not feeding the birds or holding an umbrella overhead, but new research suggests a different approach, staring them down. A study from Biology Letters on Wednesday by the Royal Society suggests that making eye contact might be the easy way to fend off gulls. It was trialled in Cornwall. And what was found, gulls use behavioural cues from humans when making foraging decisions in urban environments, and that they find the human gaze aversive. Ali Jones, is this something you'd be prepared to try?
No way. Staring at a bird with a big sharp beak with your big open unprotected eyes. Now, what about that makes sense?
Sunglasses.
Yeah, but then I doubt you're getting that eye-to-eye important contact that they're talking about. You'd have to be a nut job.
But now you've got really big eyes, haven't you?
And just people walking by going, is that Ali? What's she doing?
Actually, David's not. You could paint eyes on, couldn't you? Because then it looks like you're looking. Paint eyes on your sunglasses and stare them down, and you're protected. Yeah, I could do that. Yeah,
that's not a bad idea.
I would point out that, and I think it was Eleanor Range Roy wrote this for The Guardian. She's been reporting on the which species is it? The red-billed seagull. Mm-hmm. Really failing to read this out. Is severely at risk. There are about 27,800 breeding pairs left nationwide. That's a drop of about 80 to 100%. Well, no, 80%.
Well, as long as staring at them isn't going to give them a coronary, you'll be all right, won't you?
Yeah. So I can't say I feel monstered by them ever. They maybe I'm just too forbidding. Maybe it's the size of my nose. They're thinking you're dealing with some kind of large bird.
Yeah. Rajoshi Chakraborty said this on the panel. He said, I haven't had the pleasure of being accosted by this New Zealand phenomenon of being harangued by a seagull. What is this thing that we speak of?
Yeah, right.
But
There's a butcher in Edgware, Peter Timms here in Christchurch, and on the roof is a nest of gulls, and they have been there for years. I guess they return and live there. And at nesting time, you take your life in your hands if you get to a certain part of the building when you're going in to buy your chops, and they'll dive you. They will actually dive at you. So,
are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's the magpie thing. We all know about that.
Yep.
Yeah, well, Madeline Gumas, a postgrad researcher at Exeter University, discovered seagulls take an average of 21 seconds longer to steal hot chips if they were being watched. So, David Slack, now you know, when you're sitting on, what's the Devonport Beach? Is it called
Windsor Reserve is where you go. Well, no, all of them are good for it. But Windsor Reserve is where people tend to go most with their fish and chips, because that means you're just walking across the road and you don't have to wait any longer. But you might also be at Torpedo Bay or Cheltenham Beach or Narrowneck.
So next time you're sitting there, David, just stare at them, okay? Just stare them down and you'll be okay.
Will do. Or maybe I'll just biff stuff at them.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. You've been both wonderful. Ali Jones, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Great to have you on. And David Slack, the same as you.
Cheers, man.
Thank you to Emil for putting the show together. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45 for Peter Dunn and Michelle Bogue. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, 2 twisters in less than 24 hours. At least 2 people are injured after a tornado touches down in New Plymouth. And we're inside an Auckland house that lost its roof in last night's whirlwind. The Waitangi Tribunal reckons all prisoners should have the right to vote by next year's election. So what or who could stand in their way? And holy cow, Fonterra is now forecasting a loss of up to $675 million. Plans to wind up state-owned insurer Southern Response by the end of the year, even though it's still got more than 350 cases on the books. And Wellington's wambling penguins apparently choose burgers over sushi. Don't forget, you can check us out live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. The long and bitter row between junior doctors and their District Health Board employers is over. The doctors have accepted recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority aimed at ending the dispute. The authority was called in months ago in a bid to break the deadlock, which resulted in 5 strikes between January and May. The DHB spokesperson, Peter Bramley, says a new change management process will deliver what's needed for the boards and resident medical officers.
Now, local DHBs with their RMO teams can now decide how services are best configured that support better service delivery, better care for patients, and also a better training environment for the RMOs.
The Junior Doctors Union says its members have been assured they will be fully involved in any proposal to change working arrangements. An Auckland resident whose roof blew off in last night's tornado says it hasn't put him off living there. The tornado that briefly struck Ashby Avenue and St Heliers also brought down trees, fences and power lines. The roof covering Dave Harris's dining room is now strewn across his property and that of his neighbours.
You could hear the hails like bang, 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 real big stones. And then I saw all going past the windows there was like snow and looked like snow.
Yeah.
And as I came out to have a look, this just took off.
Just ripped off?
Just gone. Instantly. Just a big bang, I suppose, all the ripping of timber snapping.
Dave Harris says the rest of his home still has power and his family will continue to stay there. The waterfront venue, The Cloud, is temporarily closed to the public while minor weather damage is fixed. Meanwhile, the husband of a woman injured by a tornado near New Plymouth this morning says she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maxine Bamford has a suspected broken collarbone after being slammed into the wall of the couple's farmhouse in Leperton. John Bamford says she had been outside feeding some orphan lambs.
The wind that got her and threw her against the house and it's broken a collarbone. That's all I know at this stage. I don't know if she's concussed or bloody shock.
John Bamford says windows blew in, the roof was damaged and trees came down on their property. Met Service says there's a chance of more tornadoes touching down on the west coast of the North Island tonight. A man has pleaded guilty to the murder of a Wellington woman and the sexual violation of her daughter. Joseph William Borton entered the plea in the High Court in Wellington this morning. Laura Dooney reports.
In April, Borton entered the Karori home where the pair were using a neighbour's washing machine and dryer. He discreetly entered the home and attacked the 12-year-old girl with a mallet, fracturing her skull and knocking her unconscious. When her mother came to help, he hit her with a rapid series of blows. He later sexually assaulted the 12-year-old while her mother lay dying nearby. The older woman died at the scene. She and her daughter have name suppression. Borton will be sentenced in October. Call Laura Dooney aho.
The Labour Party is likely to establish an independent body to hear complaints as it continues to face questions over its handling of allegations of bullying and harassment. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has confirmed the party investigated complaints about one of its members who works at Parliament and the process is now being reviewed independently. This afternoon, she said it's her expectation Labour's Governing Council, which met at the weekend, will set up a new option for complaints about a certain threshold.
The nature of our organisation means that I absolutely believe there will be a need for, in some cases, there to be a third party, a neutral party, able to investigate complaints that all parties can have faith in.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The National Party will block any attempt by the government to try to return the right to vote to prisoners. The Waitangi Tribunal wants MPs to urgently repeal a 2010 law change that prevented all prisoners from voting so they can take part in next year's election. It says the change breached the treaty and is significantly prejudicial to Māori. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says the tribunal has made a compelling case to let prisoners vote, but he needs Cabinet approval first. Nationals leader Simon Bridges says people jailed for committing crimes lose certain rights, and the right to vote should be one of them. The Green Party intends to table an amendment aimed at overturning the ban. A Waikato dairy farmer is calling on others in the industry to become proactive and ask the hard questions of Fonterra. The cooperative today forecast a loss of between $590 and $675 million for the current financial year. It's writing down the value of underperforming overseas assets and reviewing local operations, and will issue no dividend to its shareholders this year. Matthew Zonderup, who farms near Te Poi, says farmers need to stop being so apathetic and start putting the hard word on Fonterra.
I'm not blaming farmers at all, but they've also got to take responsibility because it is their company. They've got to go back to the Shareholders' Council and ask them, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? These questions now have to be asked.
Matthew Zonderup says if farmers don't take an interest in what Fonterra does, they can't complain later. It's 5:05. No news is possibly good news for All Blacks lock Scott Barrett, who's still awaiting the outcome of his judicial hearing after being sent off in the Bledisloe Cup loss to Australia at the weekend. Barrett was sent off for a dangerous tackle just before half-time in Saturday night's test in Perth. The Judicial Committee adjourned its hearing last night and is awaiting further evidence. Barrett, though, is likely to at least miss this weekend's Bledisloe Cup decider at Eden Park. Penalties for such offences generally earn a 4-week suspension, which means he could also miss the All Blacks' first 2 World Cup games. Meanwhile, hooker Dane Coles concedes the side's performance lacked commitment, and the Wallabies' desire to win was simply greater.
You can see the way they played. They had a lot of hunger, they were desperate, and we didn't show that. We lacked intensity. We missed 20 tackles in the first 20 minutes. So just a little attitude adjustment and that desire to, not let down that, not just the chance for the Bledisloe, but respect that All Black jersey.
Dane Coles. After a long qualification phase, the All Blacks finally get to play their first official Basketball World Cup warm-up game tonight when they play Japan near Tokyo. The All Blacks have suffered a couple of setbacks with Ruben Terangi and veteran skipper Mika Vukona ruled out with injury. The World Cup starts in China at the end of the month. And Willis Feasy has reclaimed the national men's giant slalom ski title in Queenstown this afternoon. That's the news.
St Helier's ceilings go blowing in the wind.
We were all of a sudden totally exposed to this weather. It was just amazing. The next door neighbour's roof was splattered all over our place.
Tamahiri says government should pay for shelter from the storm.
0800 Jacinda makes it very clear that the head of the New Zealand government has the obligation and responsibility to fund the problem.
And a hard rain's going to fall for Fonterra.
There was always more bad news to come. They've decided clearly now that they've got sort of a handle on it to get it out there in the open as they're sort of obliged to do.
Don't think twice. Tune in to Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, Southern DHB's Chief Executive responds to criticisms about the Health Board's colonoscopy and bowel cancer service. And after 10, culinary innovator Nancy Silverton, one of the pioneers of LA's artisanal bread movement. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail, easing for a time tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, a few showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings. Wairarapa, Horowhenua through to Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson. Rain possibly heavy, clearing this evening and overnight, mostly fine tomorrow. For Bulla and Westland, a few showers about Bulla clearing this evening, otherwise fine. Showers returning tomorrow. Canterbury mostly fine, showers about Banks Peninsula tomorrow evening. Otago mostly fine, a few evening showers, isolated showers from late tomorrow morning with snow flurries to 600 metres inland and 300 metres near the coast. Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, a few showers, snow flurries possible to 400 metres later tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers clearing early tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. A woman has a suspected broken collarbone after being slammed into the side of her home during a tornado in New Plymouth this morning. Roofs were lifted, windows blown in, and a woman needed ambulance treatment after the car she was travelling in was struck by a flying trampoline while travelling on State Highway 3. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
The twister came in off the sea and touched down at about 9:30 this morning. It cut a swathe through the New Plymouth Golf Club, felling trees and tossing aside shelters before ripping a roof off a home in Bell Block. A wayward trampoline briefly halted traffic heading in and out of the city as the tornado crossed State Highway 3 before slamming into John Bamford's farmhouse a couple of kilometres away on Paraitai Road in Lepperton. Mr Bamford says it came out of nowhere.
I was sitting at the table having my breakfast, my wife was outside, suddenly heard this big roar. It was raining, then it just went a big roar, and up it came, and suddenly there was shit yarn everywhere, and picked up my outside table, threw it through the conservatory window. It came through the room, ripped the window out in the lounge, ripped the ceiling down the lounge, threw shit everywhere around. Carried on and then started demolishing trees and ripped the front fence out.
Mr Bamford said his wife Maxine was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
She was outside, I think, feeding 2 orphan lambs, and I think the wind that got her and threw her against the house, and it's broken a collarbone. That's all I know at this stage. She's a bit, I don't know if she's concussed or bloody, what do you call it? Bloody shock.
St John's Ambulance confirmed that it transferred one patient who had suffered moderate injuries from Paraitai Road to Taranaki Base Hospital. The service also attended to a woman whose car had been struck by a trampoline on State Highway 3. She did not need hospital treatment. Before crossing the highway, the twister had wrecked the roof on Wayne Jury's 2-year-old home on Cook Farm Grove, disturbing his breakfast as it did so.
But I was watching out the dining room ranch slider, because we'd heard a bit of a noise, and next minute it all went misty, and the fence just started plucking off, so I just raced away out of the line of the window. It tipped up the barbecue table and hit that sideways into the ranch slider and smashed the barbecue table, but I wasn't looking the rest of the time. When I opened my eyes again sort of thing, I came out and here's all this. I couldn't believe it.
Linda Jury was just happy no one in the cul-de-sac had been injured.
It's only a house, isn't it? Even no one was injured. It could have been real bad with the tin that was flying around in the roof. When you see how big some of the bits are that are flown, it's just unbelievable what it's done.
Kiara Parks was on her way to school when she saw the Jury's roof take off.
I was just driving down the road to school, and then I looked in my rearview mirror and I just saw all the roof come over my car. And I didn't really know what it was. I thought a house just got struck with lightning or something, so I just carried on. Then I went on the highway to go to school, and a few cars have crashed. And that's when my nana called me, because Nana's my neighbour, and she was like, you better come home.
The Jury's roof had smashed into the front of the 17-year-old's family home. Her neighbour, Beverly Webster, saw it coming.
We were over at the daughter-in-law's having we just finished a coffee, because their lounge looks down here. It was so calm. I said to Lena, there's no wind, it's the calm before the storm. And then next thing, oops, hello, there's roof flying, there's debris flying everywhere. So we just grabbed the dogs and ran into the lounge, and we found all this mess now. I'm still shaken.
Met Service meteorologist Lewis Ferris says the weather radar had shown signs of a possible tornado this morning, and there is a chance of more thunderstorms tonight, with small tornadoes also a possibility.
A couple more bands could be thrown that way throughout the afternoon, evening and into the nighttime period, where we still have a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms through until midnight tonight, with a high risk for thunderstorms. So we've encompassed damaging winds with that and small tornadoes possible.
And if you do find yourself in the midst of a tornado, take a word of advice from John Bamford. Get out of the way.
What did you think was happening?
I suddenly saw that wrong. I thought, it's a tornado. And how do you stop it? And you can't. I know now.
Powerco says about 800 properties were without power this morning due to storm damage, but by this afternoon the number of customers affected in New Plymouth, Inglewood and Waitara was about 500. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Robin Martinaho.
And the full extent of the damage from last night's tornado that hit a street in the Auckland suburb of St Heliers was laid bare today. The tornado touched down briefly in Ashby Avenue just after 9 last night, tearing roofs off houses and bringing down trees, fences and power lines. Tom Furley went there today and filed this report.
You could hear the hails bang, 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 real big stones. And then I saw all going past the windows, there was like snow and looked like snow.
Yeah.
And as I came out to have a look, this just took off.
So was there any sort of creaking or cracking beforehand, or was it just ripped off?
Just gone, instantly. Just a big bang, I suppose, all the ripping of timber snapping.
Standing in Dave Harris's dining room today, a light drizzle is coming through a gaping hole in the roof. Splintered wood is scattered across a pool table, which last night took on a more literal meaning, with water pouring from its pockets. Part of Dave's roof is strewn across his neighbour's lawn, while his neighbour's has been blown onto his.
Yeah, so that's part of the roof. So it's still got part of the ceiling and the roof on it. And that red one, that's part of his roof. And you can see that goes down round the corner, it's just bent.
A big canvas tent he'd put out to dry last week ended up at his neighbour Craig Hawkins' place. So is this where Dave's tent ended up?
Oh, yeah, it's tent. So that was in the pool. So we pulled it out this morning. And all this iron and all this wood was all in the swimming pool. So that round the back here is where.
Is that your roof or his roof?
His roof. So it's come from the far side of his house, swirled around in the air and landed there.
So did you see that happening, or it just...
No, it happened so fast. So
yeah.
We were just sitting there watching TV, and then the hail started, then the rumble happened, and then the explosion happened, and it was all over, just like that.
When you say explosion, was that what, just the...
Well, it was the noise of obviously the doors imploding when the wind blew it out, and the roof lifting off, I suppose, and the tree taking out the power line that was connected to the corner of the house. It just went. It was just one big bang, and it was done instantly.
Mr. Hawkins' backyard is a mess of corrugated iron, cladding and timber. At the front, his fence and mailbox has been completely flattened, and there's a gaping hole in the corner of the house. An insurance assessor was there this morning, and tradespeople are already getting to work. Behind Dave and Craig's properties, Kathy Walsh's home escaped with just a few scratched weatherboards and broken spouting. On the lawn, shards of debris had embedded themselves in the ground.
Well, it was quite quiet, and then all of a sudden it sounded like there was hail on the roof, and stupidly we opened the curtains and stood looking out the window, and it was just like looking into a washing machine. Couldn't see what was happening except this amazing swirl of water and stuff and everything going around in front of us, and then within a few minutes all the furniture on the deck and everything was just all over the place.
As property owners began cleaning up, friends and those who just wanted to lend a hand dropped by to check in. Elizabeth Drayton lives a street over and, having experienced the Christchurch earthquakes, wanted to help.
I'm literally just calling by to see what they need, offered them to come and use our home if they need power or they want any food or they need more blankets or anything like that, not knowing. It's not a case of rubbernecking, it's really just a case of, as I say, paying it forward and helping out if you can. Isn't that what life is? Isn't that what community is?
On Auckland's waterfront, the Cloud was also damaged in the wild weather. Auckland Live, which manages the venue, says the structural damage was not significant. One of the distinctive plastic panels was damaged at the very end of the building and a side door was broken. Initial repairs have begun and Queen's Wharf will remain closed to the public while they are carried out. It says it won't impact any events at the Cloud, with the next one still a month away. And Aucklanders are being warned to batten down the hatches again tonight, with more severe weather forecast for the Upper North Island. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's 18 minutes after 5, and if you were listening to those two pieces on your drive home, well worth a look online. We'll post them both. You can see the extent of the damage in Andrew and Tom's pieces there. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. How the hell did it get to this? That's the question from farmers supplying to Fonterra, as it forecasts a loss of up to $675 million this year. The bleak outlook comes as the cooperative writes down the value of underperforming overseas assets and reviews local operations. It's also scrapped a dividend for this year. Andrew McRae reports.
Matthew Zonderop farms near Te Poe in Waikato. He believes Fonterra needs to get back to basics.
And the rest will follow. But, we've got our fingers in too many pies. They've made bad investments. It's got to go back to the farmers for them now to be not so apathetic now with the Shareholders' Council and with their voting right. And they've got to now turn up to meetings and start asking these hard questions.
Matthew Zonderop says the loss of this year's dividend will be extremely hard for a lot of farmers as it will hinder growth and their ability to pay off debt.
You know, because a lot of guys are still struggling with debts, particularly young farm owners that have gone out and purchased their first farm, and you know they were buying shares in it when they were at $6, in the $5.90 range, $6, and then now all of a sudden their capital investment is halved, and their interest rate is higher than the value of the share. It's almost it's almost walk away material like in the US housing crisis.
Ohinawai dairy farmer Roger Lumsden says Fonterra's announcement will knock the confidence of its 10,000 or so farmer shareholders.
You know, our on-farm expenses are certainly creeping up, and we're trying to cover them with our milk price. Yeah, so it's just, it's a direction of where everything's going, I guess, is probably making people go, well, you know, we had a lot of money tied up in shares, and if we're going to lose the value on those shares, where do we go to from here?
Roger Lumsden's concerned that while Fonterra is cutting ties with a number of overseas investments, it may lose some of its influence in those markets.
If we start to lose that, it will become fairly concerning. Yeah, I think it had a little bit of tidying up to do. We went for a period where they were very, very quick to spend money on capital overseas, and some of that just is shown to be a poor investment.
Federated Farmers Vice President and Fonterra supplier Andrew Hoggard says farmer shareholders will be unhappy with this forecast result as they expect better from the company. He says there's been a failure by board and management, and shareholders deserve a proper explanation as to how that occurred and how the cooperative will ensure it doesn't happen again.
It's not good. I can understand why it makes no sense to pay a dividend if you make a loss, so I can accept that. What I'm still having a huge challenge with is the fact that how the hell did it get like this?
Fonterra has acknowledged the news is tough for farmers, but is reassuring them that the forecast loss won't impact on the cooperative's ability to operate. Chief Executive Miles Hurrell says the decision to write down the value of underperforming overseas assets and review local businesses wasn't made lightly.
We have been undertaking a process since September 2018 to reevaluate all investments, major assets and partnerships to ensure they still meet the co-op's needs. Farmers and unit holders will rightly be frustrated by these write-downs, but I do want to assure them that they do not in any way impact our ability to continue to operate. These are important accounting adjustments Fonterra needed to make.
Fonterra's Chief Financial Officer, Mark Rivers, says the core of the business is doing very well.
And we've got pockets that are extremely attractive businesses, and the key is for us to just keep working on those and delivering. And we do that, then we'll have good results next year.
Owen Reimer is a senior research analyst at Harbour Asset Management. He says while Fonterra's write-downs are disappointing, they were expected as a number of the assets were being prepared for sale.
I think for a long period of time, Fonterra has delivered earnings weaker than what we thought they were going to do, and over time that probably means that the balance sheet catches up with them. The assets are not generating the earnings that we thought they would.
Owen Reimer says Fonterra's challenge is now to decide just what its core business really is.
Fonterra has for its entire history been distracted by value-add opportunities that it simply did not have the capitalisation or capital structure to pursue in a proper way, and that is now catching up.
Fonterra says its forecast farmer payout for this year and for next season both remain unchanged. For Checkpoint, core Andrew McGratene.
23 minutes after 5, we're always keen for your feedback, so do get in touch. That Fonterra, while forecast a loss of up to $675 million this year, that is a lot of zeros. Let us know what you make of that. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Former long-time inmate Arthur Taylor believes the biggest barrier to giving prisoners the right to vote is Winston Peters, and he's offering to meet with the New Zealand First Leader to explain why it's the right thing to do. The Waitangi Tribunal wants MPs to urgently reinstate all prisoners' right to vote in time for next year's election, saying the ban that was introduced in 2010 breaches the treaty and disproportionately affects Māori. Justice Minister Andrew Little says he's leaning towards recommending to Cabinet that the voting ban only be lifted for those serving a sentence of up to 3 years. Arthur Taylor kicked off the voting rights case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he also gave evidence at the Waitangi Tribunal. And he hopes the Tribunal's recommendations will finally mean an end to what he describes as a pointless discriminatory law.
It's racist. You know, it's based on race. Now, how the heck can any self-respecting liberal democracy, if we're still one, have that sort of legislation on its statute books?
I want to get to the politics of it soon, but why is it so important, in your view, that prisoners get this right back?
Well, it's not only important for prisoners, it's important. The right to vote is the key thing that differentiates a democracy from any other sort of system of government, right? Now, if it was always my view that if the Parliament was allowed to discriminate, to disenfranchise a particular group because of their status, then that was dangerous ground. We were going down a dangerous route, a dangerous precedent, because it was prisoners out of favour then in 2010. What about the next group that came along that was out of favour? Now, that's what really worried me. So this battle had to be fought, whatever the cost.
Is it going to make prisoners better people to be able to vote? I mean, what benefit will they get from being able to participate?
Well,
when they're stuck behind bars?
Well, it's essential for rehabilitation, in my view. Essential thing for effective rehabilitation is to make prisoners feel they're included as part of the community, to strengthen the links between prisoners and the community, because then they've got a bit of a stake in it, you know, their whānau, their family, whatever. And if you do that, they're less inclined to break the society's rules, in my view, in my experience.
But some people would argue that they've foregone those rights to fully participate in society because of what they've done. You know, they had a chance, they blew it, some people would argue, and therefore you shouldn't get the right to vote.
Well, that's obviously the views of some people, but think about it for a minute. The punishment really, what's the purpose? First we go back to what is the reason for this legislation? What legitimate purpose does it serve? Punishment? Well, it's totally unequal, because it depending on what you were sentenced for when. What about a guy, let's say a burglar, he gets periodic detention. He doesn't go to prison. He can vote, but he's done the same crime as somebody that's got prison. You know, so, and the other thing, deterrence. That's another, legitimate purpose of imprisonment. Well, what? I have yet to meet the criminal that sat down before he committed a crime and thought, shit, if I get caught breaking this law, I'll lose my right to vote when I go to prison. It doesn't have any impact on deterrence whatsoever. So what reason is this sitting on the statute books when it breaches so many fundamental rights and principles of a free and democratic society?
Okay, so this ruling has given you some hope. What do you think the biggest barrier is going to be to making change? Because the recommendation is that prisoners get the right to vote in time for the 2020 election. Who or what's the biggest barrier to that happening?
The biggest barrier, and I don't know if I'm allowed to name the biggest barrier.
Name.
Winston Peters.
Really?
The big white elephant in the room. Yeah, most members of the government, from my understanding, and I hear quite a few things unofficially, they actually support repeal of this legislation. They want it because it's becoming it's making New Zealand lose its moral authority in the world and making it an international embarrassment. We were at the forefront of extending the franchise. Remember, we were the first country in the world to give women the vote. You know, this is undermining everything that's been done, a lot of what's been done, by our previous generations.
Okay, so why do you think that Winston Peters is going to be the problem?
Well, I honestly can't for the life of me figure out why. I think they've got some myth in New Zealand First that their sort of supporters actually support this, right? And I think that's a myth. You know?
What do you mean, tough on crime stance?
Yeah, tough on crime. If you drill down into it, it's not tough on crime, all right? It actually promotes crime.
How so?
Well, because, like I said before, anything that strengthens the link between the community and prisoners, offenders, is going to ultimately lead to a lessening in crime because they feel they've got a stake, so they're not going to reoffend. They're going to be less likely to reoffend, so there's going to be less victims down the road.
Okay, so what would you say to Mr. Peters to convince him, if he needs convincing, that this change should go ahead?
Well, first of all, I'd say, look, Winston, read the report of the tribunal, read the decision, and you'll see hopefully you'll be persuaded by that. But if I'm quite prepared to debate it, or any information he wants that I've got, I'm quite prepared to make it available to him. But it's not achieving any legitimate purpose, it's as I say, it's got a lot of downside.
What do you think the political mix is of prisoners in terms of the way they would vote?
Well, at the 2014 election, I took a lot of sounders because, that's when it was becoming. And they were, at that stage, I was supporting Mana mostly because it had prisoner-friendly policies, lessening the numbers in prison and stuff like that. So they were overwhelmingly in support of Mana. But now I don't know what it'd be, They tend to, obviously favour policies that, benefit them, like any segment of our society, any voter. So I would imagine the party that had the most prisoner-friendly policies, probably the Green Party or Labour.
I want to return briefly to Winston Peters because Labour would need the support of New Zealand First, and as you've identified, the Green Party does support prisoners having the right to vote. Would you like to get in a room with Mr Peters and explain your position?
I would love to get in a room with Mr Peters and explain a few. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say perhaps there's a hell of a lot he doesn't know. I mean, we all know that if we hear one side of an argument and we don't have all the relevant information before us, we could easily make wrong decisions. We can make cock-ups.
Are you inviting him to meet over this?
I am inviting him. I'm available, at any sort of time.
So does this government need to make it a top priority?
It needs to make it a top priority because every day it remains on the statute books as undermining our international reputation.
Are you enrolled?
Yes, I certainly am. Yeah. But it wasn't through, the Corrections Department told the tribunal, and I gave evidence to the tribunal, Lisa, about this, that every prisoner on release gets a so-called enrolment pack. It doesn't happen. In reality, the prisons haven't even got stocks of them. Well, Kerry, where I got released from, never had a stock. You met me the day I got released, and I looked like I had an election pack with me, and I was on my way to enrol.
I didn't notice that. No. So there's between 6,000 and 7,000 prisoners in New Zealand. This is not going to change the outcome of an election or possibly even an electorate seat, is it? That's
where there's a little myth. I don't know if you remember back to the Florida debacle with Bush and Gore, right? Where a few hundred, I think, changed the whole United States, a population of 200-something million. 2014 elections, right? Personal experience, right? At that election, the decision was basically decided in Te Tai Tokerau. Kelvin Davis got, I think it was about 700 votes more than Honi, right? Now, Honi would have bought, with the percentage of the vote that Mana got, he would have brought another MP in, right? If Honi had won Te Tai Tokerau, he would have brought another MP in. That would have been wiped out Key's majority, which I think was 1. Right? Now, there were far more than 700 Ngāpuhi prisoners around New Zealand. I mean, and I know that they would have probably supported Mana.
So do you think that's why there's resistance, that the prisoners would have the power to change the outcome in a situation like that?
I'd like to think not. I'd like to think our politicians weren't that petty and conniving and self-interested. But I think it's got a grain of truth about it. Yeah, I think that our right-wing parties know that the prisoners are, not sort of in the forefront of their supporters, and therefore, hey, what's it going to hurt if they aren't allowed to vote? It's one less lot we got to worry about. Yeah.
Well, that's former inmate Arthur Taylor, who's long campaigned for prisoners to get the right to vote back. And National today confirmed that it thinks prisoners should lose the freedom to vote if they are sentenced to jail. Let us know what you think on that. Is it a right to vote or is it a privilege? And when should that be taken away from you, if ever? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Resident Doctors Association is live on the end of the junior doctors' dispute with district health boards. And body scanners are installed at Dunedin Airport. And then Wellington's wombling penguins, they pass up sushi in favour of burgers. Can you believe it? Always pleased to hear from you, so do get in touch about anything that you've heard on the program today. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us a good old-fashioned email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And, a little late to the headlines with Susanna.
The Junior Doctors Union has won an assurance from district health boards the doctors will be fully involved in any proposal to change working arrangements. The doctors have accepted recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority, ending the months-long dispute. The authority was called in months ago in a bid to break the deadlock, which resulted in 5 strikes between January and May. An Auckland resident whose St Heliers house lost its roof in last night's tornado says the twister hasn't put him off living there. The tornado that briefly struck Ashby Avenue in St Heliers also brought down trees, fences and power lines. The roof covering Dave Harris's dining room is now strewn across his property and that of his neighbours. And in New Plymouth, a woman has a suspected broken collarbone after she was slammed against a wall of her Lepperton farmhouse. Her husband says she was outside feeding some orphan lambs. Another woman was struck by a flying trampoline. A man has pleaded guilty to the murder of a Wellington woman and the sexual violation of her daughter. Joseph William Borton entered the plea in the High Court in Wellington this morning. After hitting the girl with a mallet, he sexually assaulted the 12-year-old while her mother lay dying from a similar attack nearby. The Labour Party is looking at establishing an independent body to hear complaints as it continues to face questions over its handling of allegations of bullying and harassment. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has confirmed the party investigated complaints about one of its members who works at Parliament, and the process is now being reviewed independently. She says she expects Labour's Governing Council, which met at the weekend, will set up a new option for complaints above a certain threshold. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and it's time for the business news. Madison Reedy has joined us. Hi, Madison.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome back.
Thank you. Contact Energy, results announced today. And your results, how did it do?
Yeah, full year result, this one. So the country's largest power company, Contact Energy, it nearly tripled its net profit in the year to June. So it reported a net profit after tax of $345 million. Now, that is up from $132 million last financial year. Now, the gain was mostly down to selling 2 assets, a gas storage facility business and also its Rock Gas LPG business. Its cost-cutting program also delivered the goods there too. Its costs were down by around 30%. Now, if you're thinking that your power bill is what contributed to Contact's profitability,
to talk about how much they pay to power companies.
Absolutely,
for sure.
They do. But I can tell you in this situation, that is not the case. Contact's earnings from its customers was actually down in the year. The cost of distributing electricity to its customers rose in the year, and because the competition in the electricity market is so hot at the moment that they couldn't pass that extra cost onto their customers, so they had to suck it up and absorb it instead. So they mostly made more money from generating more power, particularly hydropower, compared to a pretty dry year in its hydro lakes last year. And it is also actually looking to build a new geothermal power station in the Waikato this year. It's going to start drilling 4 sort of test wells to test the ground there and see what they can make of it.
Interesting. Hey, and you also got the latest retail spending figures, but what they show we're easing off, flashing the credit card and out shopping?
No, not so much. I mean, I sometimes am. I don't know about you, Lisa. You just went on holiday. Gosh, you probably were. Exactly. So these are the electronic card spending results. So they were actually flat in the month of July. They fell just 0.1%, so barely worth mentioning there. There were falls in most of the retail spending industries there, apparel being clothing fell the hardest, as did durables, which is things like hardware and furniture. There was one rise, though. Can you guess what category it was in?
Food?
Fuel.
Oh, fuel. Okay.
That was up 2.7% in the month of July. Now, this comes despite rates continuing to fall. And now that is meant to spur spending by consumers in the economy. The fact that they've stayed flat in the month of July and months before that too, that suggests that the Reserve Bank's whopping 50 basis point cut, which we saw last week, may actually not make much of a difference to encourage consumers to spend any more than they already are at at this rate.
Should we have a quick trot around the markets? What's been going on?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed down just half a point. That's 0.004% to 10,872. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 64.7 US cents, 95.3 to the Australian and 53.7 British pence.
Thanks, Madison. That's Madison Reesy with our business update this evening. The long row between junior doctors and district health boards appears to be over. The Resident Doctors Association says doctors have accepted recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority aimed at ending the dispute. Now, that dispute saw junior doctors strike 5 times in the first 5 months of the year. David Munro is a senior advocate with the Resident Doctors Association and joins us now. Hi, David. You must be pretty relieved that this is seemingly coming to an end.
Well, I think it's fair to say that. It's been a very, very long dispute. It's been more than 18 months, and we're very pleased to finally have a settlement.
So what sealed the deal?
Well, the deal is the authority was quite helpful and it understood the issues that were confronting the sides and has come up with a change management method and proposal that ensures that RMOs, junior doctors, remain protected and remain with the opportunity to have their union involved at every step of the way in terms of change proposals.
So what does that mean? Because obviously, sorry to interrupt, but one of the major sticking points was over who gets the final say over rosters. So when you say they still get a say and they're protected, what do you actually mean? How does that work?
Well, the DHBs wanted the union out of the process completely. I think they made no secret about that. They thought that the union's involvement was some sort of obstacle to achieving flexibilities, which our members would often see sort of flexibility as code for rosters that may not suit them, that may be too fatiguing. And they haven't achieved that. What we've got is a process that involves the union and its members all the way through, and then the ultimate decision being made at a local level by 66% majority of the RMOs that are affected, which has been a change management mechanism in our MECA for a very long time.
So 66%, did you say, David?
Of other areas.
66% of the junior doctors ultimately would have to agree to the changes that a particular hospital was suggesting.
That's right.
Okay, so what was the vote for this deal? How much support did you have for it?
In the end, Lisa, it was overwhelming. People saw that this was a sensible approach to take us forward, and they've endorsed it overwhelmingly, and I think all of us are looking forward to moving into the new world, seeing these consultations happen, making sure the debates are run properly, people have the information that they need, and then make that decision at the end of the process pursuant to that majority I've just talked about.
If it's a sensible solution, how come you couldn't get to it any earlier?
I think it's because the DHBs wanted too much. They just wanted the union out of the process altogether and just weren't prepared to accept when our members said, we want our union involved in these processes. We're not going to settle a deal that sees them shut out of it. So
do you feel that this is a win for you guys?
I think it's a win for the parties, for the system. The authority was helpful. It was able to see that RMOs are vulnerable and that they weren't simply going to accept that DHBs, because of their obligations under legislation to be good and healthy and safe employers, would do the right thing without the involvement of their union. And that's why we've now got a mechanism that embeds the NZRDA and those change management processes.
So those recommendations made by the Employment Relations Authority, are those going to be made public in their entirety?
Well, to the extent that the settled MECA goes up on our website and the change management process is in there, anybody can go and have a look at that and see the process that's now in place for change management. Yeah, there's no secret about them.
So what other recommendations were in there that are significant besides that kind of voting right, if you like?
In the end, the authority made a comprehensive recommendation, and there was quite a bit of toing and froing in order to get those other issues nailed down. What was the level of an appropriate pay increase over 2 years, the lump sum for the length of time that we've taken, matters of that sort. They wound up having a recommendation in all of those areas. They were accepted by the DHBs and have been endorsed overwhelmingly at vote by the RMOs.
Is there anything in that you feel you were shortchanged on then, or are you happy with it across the board?
I think it's been a long dispute. We would have preferred that it didn't take this long. Certainly the DHB is trying to rely on the fact that there was another union in the mix now that was prepared to have less rigorous change management proposals, prepared to allow for rosters with longer hours that our members had already voted to be unsafe. There's no question that meant this dispute has taken longer than we would have liked.
So what are you saying, David, that they tried to drive a wedge between the two? They tried to drive a wedge between the two associations. Is that what you're implying?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm implying that, but we're simply stating it. We've got letters from the Minister himself saying that the DHBs have already settled with an alternative organisation. Why can't the RDA do the same? So that was the pressure that the union and our members were under all the way through. And given that, we're pretty pleased with the outcome we've achieved.
Was it all worth it? Because obviously there were extensive strikes. People's healthcare was disrupted. Was it worth all of that?
I think so. The RMOs weren't going to see this settled without winning that argument that being able to involve the union that they've chosen to associate with. This is a Federal Association argument. The RMOs choose to be members of the RDA. They choose to have them involved in these processes. They respect the experience over many years of dealing with rosters and the battle that we've had over years to get safer and safer rosters. And it's a battle that's not nearly over, by the way, Lisa. And I think that to the extent that the DHBs wanted the NZRDA completely removed from that discussion, and they weren't successful at that, we're part of that discussion. We intend to participate responsibly in that discussion. And I think the RMOs are pleased that that's the future that they'll be facing.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That's David Munro, who's a senior advocate with the Resident Doctors Association, saying there that members have, as he put it, voted overwhelmingly in support of an offer which is based on recommendations made by the Employment Relations Authority. Plans to shut controversial earthquake insurer Southern Response by the end of the year have been met with concern and uncertainty. Southern Response still has 379 open claims, and EQC Minister Grant Robertson says it's now time to look at winding down the state-owned insurer and moving any remaining claims elsewhere. Sources have told Checkpoint that EQC is being explored as an option for those claims. But those who still have open claims with Southern Response are concerned things are about to get a whole lot harder. Logan Church reports.
For Christchurch homeowner Bob Burnett, it's been a long 8.5-year journey trying to get his earthquake claim sorted, and it's nowhere near over. But it will soon be over for Southern Response, who has his claim, with the EQC Minister Grant Robertson announcing the organisation will wrap up by the end of the year.
Pretty shocked, really. I knew nothing about that, and we're still waiting to have our insurance paid, and there just seems to be unbelievable delays and unnecessarily. We're still waiting for Southern Response to get a price and sit down and talk about it. We've had our side organise all their information for some time, and there just seems to be unacceptable delays, and I don't know why.
The government has pumped $1.5 billion into Southern Response after it was set up to take on earthquake claims from AMI when it failed in 2012. But it hasn't been smooth sailing. Homeowners have complained about delays in having their claims progressed. Southern Response was also accused of using controversial surveillance firm Thompson & Clark to spy on claimants. At the end of the year, Southern Response expects to have between 250 and 300 open claims left on its books, worth about $173 million. So where will these claims go? Checkpoint understands EQC is being looked at as one option, although no decision has yet been made. Bob Burnett's claim could quite possibly be one of these, and while he has little confidence in Southern Response, he's worried that if his claim is transferred, it could cause more problems.
That's frightening. Yeah, that's not going to be good at all.
Why do you say that?
I just don't have any confidence in, pass the parcel and somebody else picking up something. This has been the case all the way along with different people coming and going and people not getting up to speed and not actually reading the file. So we really need people who know what they're doing to be to deal with this.
And that's a fear shared by Tom McBrearty, chair of both EQC's Claimants Reference Group and the Homeowners Advisory Group for the Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service.
The complexity of the claims in some of these cases are quite diverse, and the result being is that some of these people have already told their story several times over and may feel they have to repeat it all over again. Now, it could well be that when the change does occur, there will be an element of, oh no, not again, yet more delay. However, I think in this occasion, the change will mean that the claimants will be, hopefully, looked after well.
High-profile earthquake insurance lawyer Grant Cameron of GCA Lawyers says EQC would be best placed to take over the remaining claims.
I think the uniform view over a long period would be that EQC is not up to many tasks at all. However, there have been significant changes over the last 12 months, and it does seem to be the appropriate sort of target vehicle. As to whether ultimately management can cope is another question, but at the moment we would have to be quietly optimistic about it.
Grant Cameron is also leading a class action against Southern Response. He claims hidden costs led to significant underpayments to about 3,000 people. He is confident the closure won't affect current legal proceedings. National's EQC spokesperson Stuart Smith says the closure of Southern Response was inevitable.
Southern Response have worked pretty well through a lot of their claims. My understanding is they're actually ahead of what their projections were in terms of settling claims, so at some point it had to come to an end. It is a pretty sad story, really, because it goes right back to AMI not having sufficient reinsurance to cover the risk. Thankfully, the national government stood in and stepped in and took it over.
Labour campaigned heavily in Christchurch on unresolved problems with the Canterbury earthquake recovery, much of which they blamed on the previous national government. However, EQC Minister Grant Robertson could not find time to speak to Checkpoint today. His office said no decision has yet been made about the next steps. And those are decisions that claimants say are desperately needed now. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And in a statement, Southern Response says any new arrangement will retain all of Southern Response's responsibilities and liabilities to claimants. It says it hopes the transition will be as smooth as possible. And in regard to Bob Burnett's claim, it says progress has been made following site visits by Southern Response engineers and builders. They say the next step is to finalise the scope of works and how the repairs can be carried out. Let us know what you think of the possible winding up of Southern Response. We'll be interested to hear from you. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As we said, 379 odd open claims there. You may be one of them. And it is about 9 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. With the Bledisloe Cup now hanging in the balance, the All Blacks have taken full responsibility for the weekend's 47-26 record loss to the Wallabies, including lock Scott Barrett's red card. The teams will face off again on Saturday night at Eden Park, where the Wallabies haven't won since 1986. The All Blacks held an official review of the match this morning, and as Ravinda Hunia reports, they say they'll need an attitude adjustment if they're to retain the trophy.
Can they finish with a flourish? Bill! Courtney Bill! 47 points to 26. Job done for the men in goal.
No one was more surprised by the All Blacks' 21-point loss to the Wallabies on Saturday night than the All Blacks themselves. Hooker Dane Coles admitting today that it was a simple case of his side lacking heart for the game and passion for the black jersey.
You can see the way they played. They had a lot of hunger, they were desperate, and we didn't show that. Yeah, looking back, we maybe take it for granted. We didn't have that, mate. Like we lacked intensity. You know, we missed 20 tackles in the first 20 minutes. So just a little attitude adjustment and that desire to, not let down that, not just the chance for the Bledisloe, but respect that All Black jersey.
While there's plenty of on-field adjustments to be made, coaching staff expressed in a review this morning that they take responsibility for the result and added the biggest change needed is attitude. And that includes the controversial red card given to lock Scott Barrett just before half-time. He was sent from the field for a shoulder charge on Wallabies skipper Michael Hooper, leaving the All Blacks a man down for the remaining 40 minutes. His fate lies in the hands of the Foul Play Committee, who are yet to rule on the incident, but teammates Sam Cane and Coles say the rule is clear.
If you're going to look at it like by the letter of the law, you could cut 20 or 30 clips probably. But I think probably what didn't help Scoot is that he had his arm, cocked back rather than making an attempt to come forward.
We know the law, so we've got to just embrace it and find ways to make sure we don't smack someone in the head.
But England coach Eddie Jones feels Barrett was hard done by. England beat Wales 33-19 in a Rugby World Cup warm-up match in Twickenham this morning, which solidified the All Blacks' top spot in the world rankings, but said post-match there were inconsistent refereeing calls in their game also.
We need to get some consistency in that area in the game. In the World Cup, if you lose a player through a red card, as New Zealand did yesterday, it makes the game very difficult. And we saw 2 instances today where that could have happened. And I urge World Rugby to get some consistency in that area, because otherwise we're going to have games that are being destroyed by an inconsistent official making a decision on a rule that's not clear.
The All Blacks recognise they need a stronger game mentally rather than physical for Game 2, a high error count a testament to that approach. Also, now there's so much on the line at Eden Park. The All Blacks haven't lost in Auckland to the Wallabies in over 3 decades. In fact, they haven't lost there at all in 42 test matches. And with the Bledisloe Cup trophy on the line to boot, Kane believes there's no time to dwell on a poor result.
The switch flicked probably as soon as we woke up yesterday morning in Perth and we started getting into our recovery. There was guys on the computers at 9 o'clock in the morning looking at their own games, and that's about looking at ways to get better. The nice part about playing at Eden Park and being here in Auckland is our second home when we're here in Auckland, and familiarity, playing there and training grounds and those things that you're used to, they play a small part.
It would also mean a confident start to a rugby world title defence in Japan, which is only 6 weeks away. Mo te hōta ko te ahi pōnei, ko Ravindo Hunia tēnei.
Dunedin Airport has become the first in the country to introduce body scanners for domestic passengers. The change is part of an expansion project as the airport grapples with increasing passenger traffic. But as our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown found out, airport bosses are hoping it will make journeys quicker.
Dunedin Airport's current terminal was built in 2006, and since that time passenger numbers have grown by almost 50%. Topping 1 million for the first time last year. The number of jets flying to the southern city has also increased by a similar percentage, and all this has led to an increasingly congested terminal during peak hours. Dunedin Airport's chief executive, Richard Roberts, says the airport's new terminal is expected to be unveiled in February. The departure area will be almost twice as big, with new retail spaces and other amenities, and 200 additional car parks will help alleviate growing pains out front.
I can't wait until we get people just walking through and there's that look of complete surprise, the look at the new boarding lounge, and even though this is only temporary at the moment, man, when it's finished it's going to be pretty special.
Richard Roberts says he's confident all the changes will speed up the process by which passengers move through the airport. The first stage of that was unveiled today as passengers on the afternoon jet service to Auckland became the first in New Zealand on a domestic flight to pass through body scanners.
It should mean a significantly, I would say, more respectable process, because we've got a great new queuing space now. You're not queuing through tables and where you shouldn't be queuing. The screening process should be quicker. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a queuing process. It doesn't mean the queues are going to disappear. We should be able to maintain shorter queues.
The body scanners, which utilise millimetre wave technology, were unveiled at Auckland Airport's international terminal in June. Mr Roberts says it may take some getting used to for passengers who haven't seen the scanners before, but they shouldn't be concerned.
It's doing exactly what we do in a more efficient way, and with regard to people's privacy, you just need to go and have a look at the image. It is literally a cardboard cutout picture. You would have no idea who it was. It's not an X-ray type image.
So the concerns out there that this machine has some sort of Superman X-ray vision that's going to see them naked through their clothes?
Hey, listen, I laugh, but I can really understand the concerns, and it's because we've not seen it before. But once you've gone through, you can see the image. You can see that. I think it'll become quite clear to everybody it's just a diagram, that's all.
Aviation Security Services Group Operations Manager Karen Irwin says within the next 18 months, all domestic passengers flying on jet services from Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin and Queenstown, and those heading overseas, will pass through the scanners.
It's vastly different from what people are used to, where they're used to quite a manual process, people having to move big trays around and pushing and pulling things through machines, and only one person can go through the system at a time. The first thing they'll notice is that actually 4 or 5 people can actually dump all their gear in a tray and move through the system at once.
Karen Irwin says no images are captured nor stored.
There is some concern because historically some of those body scanners were very intrusive, but we don't actually see the outline of the person. It's simply an avatar which looks like a gingerbread man, and all it does is show a little yellow box where there's something that we need to investigate a bit further. So we don't capture body images, we don't store anything, so people should be very, very relaxed.
Christchurch International Airport is next in line for the technology. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on our earlier story. The Waitangi Tribunal are wanting prisoners' right to vote to be reinstated in time for the next election. This person says, I totally agree with the points Arthur Taylor makes, and by default that of the Waitangi Tribunal and Supreme Court. Those that do not want prisoners to vote belong to the throw away the key crowd. If you want people to be part of society and see the value in doing so, don't remove their ability to take part in the debate about what society should look like. Voting is the right of citizenship until death. That's from Paul. Thanks, Paul. Janet, not so convinced. She says retaining or regaining the right to vote in prisons could be used as an incentive for good behaviour. Ken says that I believe that Māori would have better representation in Parliament if they could vote from prison.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātawa tēnei. A man who murdered a 52-year-old woman in Wellington told police he had intended to incapacitate the woman so he could sexually assault her 12-year-old daughter. Joseph Borton pleaded guilty today to murdering the woman and indecently assaulting the young girl at a Karori home. Laura Dooney reports.
The police summary of facts says Borton was watching the woman and her daughter through a window as they did laundry at a neighbour's house. He entered the house quietly and hit the girl on the head with a stolen mallet, the second time knocking her out and causing her skull to cave in. When her mother tried to intervene, he hit her on the head numerous times with the mallet and then sexually assaulted the 12-year-old. The mother died at the scene hours later. Borton told the police that when the mother appeared to help her daughter, he gave her 3 solid whacks. Ko Laura Dooney aho.
The Labour Party members who complained about bullying and harassment will be allowed to appeal against the findings of an internal investigation. RNZ understands 7 people laid formal complaints about the behaviour of a Labour staffer at Parliament. An internal investigation was done and no disciplinary action was taken. Labour's President Nigel Horworth says a confidential appeal process will now be set up whereby complainants in this and any future cases can appeal to an independent expert. Mr Horworth says the party will give financial support to those involved to ensure they're able to get proper legal advice. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says his personal preference is to limit the right of prisoners to vote to those with a sentence of up to 3 years. The Waitangi Tribunal wants MPs to urgently repeal a 2010 law change preventing all prisoners from voting, saying it breaches the treaty and is significantly prejudicial to Māori. Mr Little says his preference is to revert to the pre-2010 position.
My own view is that I don't think the 2010 legislation was justified or that it has achieved or is achieving anything. I think if there is to be a change, I think there is a rationale to say that if you're in prison and during the course of an electoral term you're going to be released, then you have a right to say who is governing the country, who you're going to be let free in at the end of your prison sentence.
Andrew Little. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says his caucus will discuss the issue of prisoner voting when they meet next week, but he can't promise they'll make a final decision.
There are certain aspects of it which don't make any sense no matter what your view on law and order is or what your view on punishment is. But I want my caucus colleagues to have a full-scale discussion of it, and then we'll tell you what our answer is going to be.
Winston Peters. The National Party says it will block any attempt to try to return the right to vote to prisoners. Junior doctors say a new process agreed with district health boards will ensure their interests are protected in future. Members of the Resident Doctors Association and DHBs have settled their 18-month-long employment row. It follows facilitation by the Employment Relations Authority, whose recommendations remain confidential. A union veto over proposed changes to local services was at the heart of the dispute. The union's senior advocate, David Munro, told Checkpoint a new change management process means no change can happen unless 66% of doctors locally agree. The MP for Manurewa, Louisa Wall, has confirmed that homeless people have been trespassed from the area. In the past few months, homeless advocacy groups say many vulnerable people have moved on from South Auckland because they were sick of getting trespassed. Media were not allowed at a hui today, attended by businesses and the police, but Ms Wall said afterwards that the police confirmed they enforced trespass notices because businesses in the area had issued them. She says she has asked the Manurewa Business Association to work with social services instead of first issuing a trespass notice.
Can they please come to my office? Can they please come to link people so that we can make sure that those people are in the system, so that those business owners are reassured that the people who they're wanting to trespass, actually, they do want help. We just don't have the solutions right now, and we're asking them to be part of the solution as well.
The Manurewa MP, Louisa Wall. More than 180 people have applied for 44 Kiwi-built homes available in Wellington in an apartment block ballot that closes at midnight tonight. 44 of the block's 94 apartments come under the Kiwi-build scheme. A Kiwi-build spokesperson says participants in the ballot will know the result in the coming days. Fiji's Prime Minister has challenged Australia on its climate change policies and called on it to stop producing coal. Speaking at a climate conference in Tuvalu ahead of this week's Pacific Islands Forum, Frank Bainimarama looked towards Australia's Pacific Minister Alex Hawke. He told him he understood the region's largest economy was built on coal exports, that has given it means to support the region. However, he urged it to make changes that would benefit everyone.
Put simply, the case for coal as an energy source cannot continue to be made if every nation is to meet the net zero emission target by 2050 that has been set by the UN Secretary General and every other responsible leader of the climate struggle.
Fiji's Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama. Auckland waterfront venue The Cloud is closed to the public because of damage caused by last night's wild weather. A tornado also ripped roofs off the houses in the suburb of St Heliers, and Met Service estimates there were more than 2,000 lightning strikes throughout the country yesterday. Tom Furley reports.
Auckland Live, which manages The Cloud, says the weather damaged the end panels of the mezzanine and broke a side door. Access to the wharf was restricted before the damage was done, so the public weren't nearby. The venue's director, Robbie McRae, says initial repairs have begun and Queen's Wharf will remain closed to the public until they're finished. He says it won't affect any events at the Cloud as the next one is still a month away. This is Tom Furley.
And just to hand, John Polino has withdrawn from the Auckland mayoral campaign and says he will support John Tamahere instead. It's 6:06. The former All Blacks coach John Hart wants an overhaul of the All Blacks front row, saying they were completely outplayed by their Wallaby opponents in Perth at the weekend. Hart says Owen Franks and Joe Moody should be dropped for Saturday's return clash in Auckland. He says the problems started up front, with Franks and longtime Crusaders teammate Moody failing to meet coach Steve Hanson's demands to be more energetic around the park. Hart says reserve props Atu Moli and Angus Ta'avao contributed much more and should start at Eden Park. Meanwhile, the England coach Eddie Jones has labelled Scott Barrett's send-off ridiculous. Barrett was red-carded just before half-time in Perth, but Jones says referees need to be more consistent in their rulings.
I thought it was ridiculous, mate. Bloke gets tackled, he goes to be second man in and his shoulder hits his head and he gets a red card. Can't have that in the game. So what I'm saying is that then we need to have some consistency and common sense.
Scott Barrett's case remains under review after the Foul Play Committee adjourned while awaiting further evidence. Manchester United have opened their English Premier League football season with a 4-0 thumping of Chelsea at Old Trafford. Arsenal beat Newcastle 1-0, while Leicester played out a goalless draw with Wolverhampton. And Willis Feasy has reclaimed the national men's giant slalom ski title in Queenstown this afternoon. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dana Johansson on the weekend sport. There's a window on the word of epidemiologist Richard Peto, who, despite researching the links between smoking and death, finds quite a lot to laugh about, and Katja Leyendecker on cycling in the English-speaking world. Too macho, she says. It's time to put the gladiatorial instincts away if we want more pedal pushers. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail, easing for a time tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, a few showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings. Wairarapa, Horowhenua through to Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson. Rain, possibly heavy, clearing this evening and overnight, mostly fine tomorrow. For Bulla and Westland, a few showers about Bulla clearing this evening, otherwise fine. Showers returning tomorrow. Canterbury mostly fine, showers about Banks Peninsula tomorrow evening. Otago mostly fine, but a few evening showers, isolated showers from late tomorrow morning with snow flurries to 600 metres inland and 300 metres near the coast. Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, a few showers, snow flurries possible to 400 metres later tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers clearing early tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, is keeping his cards close to his chest on whether prisoners should have the right to vote. His caucus will meet next Tuesday and he says no decisions will be made before then. The Labour Party has indicated its strong support for restoring voting rights for some prisoners, but the Prime Minister says she can't speak for the other governing parties. The National Party, however, is standing firm on a blanket ban, saying it would block any attempt to reverse it. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has this story.
The Waitangi Tribunal wants MPs to urgently repeal a law change preventing all prisoners from voting, so they can take part in next year's election. It says the 2010 law breaches the treaty and is significantly prejudicial to Māori. Winston Peters says his caucus will discuss the issue of prisoner voting when they meet next week, but he can't promise they'll make a final decision.
There are certain aspects of it which don't make any sense no matter what your view on law and order is or what your view on punishment is. But I want my caucus colleagues to have a full-scale discussion of it, and then we'll tell you what our answers are going to be.
It was the National Government in 2010 that passed the amendment banning all prisoners from voting. Before that, inmates serving less than 3 years could take part in elections. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says the Waitangi Tribunal makes a compelling case, but his personal preference is to return to the pre-2010 legislation.
My own view is that I don't think the 2010 legislation was justified or that it has achieved or is achieving anything. I think if there is to be a change, I think there is a rationale to say that if you're in prison and during the course of an electoral term you're going to be released, then you have a right to say who is governing the country, who you're going to be let free in at the end of your prison sentence.
The tribunal decision comes after a ruling by the Supreme Court late last year, which backed an earlier High Court ruling that prison inmates had the right to vote. The case was brought before the High Court in 2013 by veteran criminal and prison lawyer Arthur Taylor. Mr Taylor says the law as it stands is discriminatory and racist, and a democracy like New Zealand should be running a mile from that. He says countries like Canada, Australia, South Africa and all of the European Union have outlawed similar bans.
So do we really want to be seen as the only country, a democracy in the world, or supposed democracy in the world that upholds this sort of law? I think not.
Mr Taylor says a compromise of applying voting rights to prisoners with a sentence of up to 3 years seems fair.
Well, the tribunal, of course, has said that every prisoner should get the right to vote. Taking into account the political realities, probably the 3-year limit would be a good sort of cut-off point, because people that are absent from the country for 3 years, they lose their right to vote as well until they return to New Zealand. So that's the sort of a reasonable sort of time period.
However, the opposition leader Simon Bridges says it's right that prisoners lose the liberty to vote.
It's our law. We believed in it then and we still believe in it, and so we will oppose change. I mean, quite simply, look, if you do a crime that's serious enough for jail, you lose a number of rights, including, most importantly, your liberty. But also we think it's right while you're in prison, you lose that right to vote.
The Green Party has long campaigned for prisoner voting rights, and MP Golriz Garaman will table an amendment to the Electoral Amendment Bill, which passed its first reading last month, to overturn the ban. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
And we're getting a lot of feedback on this topic. Let's get to some of it now. Wendy says prisoners should be the first to vote, as obviously the system hasn't worked for them. Another texter has been in touch saying denying prisoners the right to vote is clear American-style voter disenfranchisement by the National Party. And this one from Felicity: who decides which rights a prisoner loses? Food, medical care, shelter are basic rights. Voting is a civil right, she says. Prison is the punishment. We don't need add-ons to the punishment. Thanks, Felicity. Do get in touch, 2101, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let us know what you think about whether prisoners should get that right back in time for next year's election. Now, you would have heard in the news, perhaps, in breaking news, John Paulino has withdrawn from the Auckland mayoral race, with the wildcard candidate throwing his support behind John Tamahere. Now, he made the announcement during a mayoral debate in Newmarket. Our Auckland Issues correspondent, Rowan Quinn, is at the debate, and she joins us now. Hi, Rowan. What's he said about why he's pulled the pin?
Hi, Lisa. Well, look, he said he wants to give John Tamahere the best chance, basically. He was a bit of surprise, actually. He's at this debate where Phil Goff, John Tamahere, the other two major candidates, are standing, and he had his little, they were allowed 7 minutes to speak each. He had his 7 minutes to talk, and then right at the end said, actually, I want to see change, and that's why I'm pulling out. And the question would have to be though whether he actually stood a serious chance of winning this thing. It would be very unlikely. He came fourth in the last election, second in the one before that, but really had a drop-off in the last election. But he says that he thinks the votes that he was going to get might have come from John Tamahere's support base, and so he wants to see change.
It sounds like quite an abrupt decision. You say there that he was actually participating in the debate as such, and then at the end of his speech just springs this on the crowd. Did he say when he came to that conclusion?
No, he didn't, Lisa, but he then immediately sent out a press release. So you think that he probably had been thinking about it at least for a little bit of time before the debate. I saw one of John Tamahere's staff members shortly after, and I asked whether they knew about it, and he said they didn't. So it was certainly a surprise for the Tamahere camp. But it seems that, Mr. Paulino had been thinking about it for a little while, but he had his 7 minutes anyway before he made the announcement.
What is it about John Tamahere that why he wants to put his weight behind him and endorse him as a candidate?
Well, he said, I think it might be more about Phil Goff, because he said what he wants is change. So he was up against Phil Goff in the last election, and he said that he thinks Auckland needs change, and John Paulino feels like he's not going to deliver the change. So from what he was saying tonight, he believes that John Tamahere has a better chance of delivering change. So more about Phil Goff at this stage anyway than John Tamahere, I think.
Thanks, Rowan. That's Rowan Quinn, our Auckland Issues correspondent there. John Paulino, as you just heard, has abruptly withdrawn from the Auckland mayoral race. In further damage control over allegations of bullying and harassment, the Labour Party says it's willing to improve the way it handles complaints. RNZ understands 7 people have laid formal complaints about one of its members who works at Parliament. The party reviewed the process used for an internal investigation into the allegations, and the party president, Nigel Harworth, now says the complainants can appeal the outcome of that investigation if they choose. He refused an interview, but in a statement says the complainants wanted to be able to appeal to someone independent of the party, and that's what will now happen. People using the appeal process will also be given financial help for legal costs. Labour's Governing Council discussed the current controversy when it met at the weekend, where the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said she made her views clear.
For my part, I shared a very clear expectation that we do need to make sure that our processes are robust, and that there will be occasion when, given the nature of our organisation, it won't be possible nor desirable for some complaints to be dealt with entirely in-house. We're having neutral parties able to help the party navigate complaints will be appropriate. and that the party should look to build that into part of their complaints processes in the future.
Last week, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister said no complaints had been lodged to her office and had instead been lodged directly with the Labour Party. Ms Ardern was asked if she had sought any further information about the complainants from the party wing.
Yes, but even then, whether or not I would divulge details that would then allow someone's personal information to be in the public domain, I don't think is something that you would expect me to do. I think you would expect me to constantly check and seek reassurances that the process has been robust and ask questions, and I have and will continue to do so. Where I've perceived that there's been failings, I've shared that. And as I say, I did share an expectation that in the future, the nature of our organisation means that I absolutely believe there will be a need for, in some cases, there to be a third party, a neutral party, able to investigate complaints that all parties can have faith in to make sure that we do not see a situation like this in the future.
Jacinda Ardern speaking at her media briefing at Parliament this afternoon. It is almost 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get in touch about anything if you heard on the program today. Text us 2101. I've got some interesting feedback about trampolines and storms, which I hope to get to before the end of the program. The US President Donald Trump is being condemned for spreading baseless conspiracy claims over the apparent suicide of the wealthy American financier Jeffrey Epstein in a New York prison cell. Mr. Trump retweeted a claim from a comedian that the former president, Bill Clinton, could have been involved. Mr. Epstein was found dead while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. The FBI and the Justice Department have both opened investigations. Here's the BBC's Chris Buckler.
Jeffrey Epstein was once the man at the centre of high society parties and a figure instrumental in the abuse of underage girls. His death in a New York prison just weeks after another apparent suicide attempt has raised many questions. Some, including the city's mayor, have called it convenient, given the alleged involvement of some of his rich and famous friends. Among those retweeting conspiracy theories was Donald Trump.
And you know what? He had information on the Clintons, and the man ended up dead.
Who gave publicity to completely unsubstantiated allegations about another president, Bill Clinton, whose wife Hillary ran against him for the presidency.
This is another example of our president using this position of public trust to attack his political enemies with unfounded conspiracy theories.
Mr. Trump was himself at one time a friend of Epstein's. They were pictured partying together, but that was many years ago. And the President and the White House insist he's now concerned about getting to the truth about what happened at events Epstein organised in Florida and New York.
I think the President just wants everything to be investigated. And, trying to connect the President to this monster from years ago, where they're seen dancing in a video, versus other people who were actively, I suppose, flying around with this monster.
The authorities here in the US are acutely aware of the questions being asked about the death of a man who had links to some of America's most influential people. It's why the FBI are investigating, something that's extremely unusual in the case of an apparent suicide. And while Epstein's victims know he won't now face trial, they're pushing for inquiries to be widened to look at the actions of his associates.
We certainly do need investigations. We need to get answers. I'm not one to traffic in conspiracy theories. My concern is the victims, the ones who I represent. We've been cooperating with law enforcement for the last several weeks because we felt that it was important that the criminal case proceed first. That case dies with Jeffrey Epstein, but the civil cases can go on.
Among his many famous friends was Prince Andrew, who attended church with the Queen at Balmoral today. In recently released court documents, he's been accused of groping a girl at Epstein's mansion, an allegation that Buckingham Palace has called categorically untrue. But the death of Jeffrey Epstein will not end the calls for greater scrutiny of what did happen at some of his notorious parties.
Chris Buckler reporting. The Prime Minister will join other Pacific leaders this week, jetting into the tiny nation of Tuvalu as it battles severe climate threats. But Jacinda Ardern is likely to face fewer awkward conversations than her Australian counterpart, Scott Morrison, as they face the heat from leaders of low-lying atolls over carbon dioxide emissions. As Australia races to catch up with New Zealand's Pacific reset, Fiji's Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama says Australia's reliance on coal poses an existential threat to Pacific islands. But it won't be the only awkward item on the agenda, as Chinese officials touch down for meetings in a country that has diplomatic relations with Taiwan. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana is in Funafuti and filed this report.
Sunday's normally a quiet day for church here in Tuvalu, where there's little noise apart from bells and singing. There was that this weekend, but there was also a frenetic energy outside the newly built convention centre, where finishing touches were hurriedly being done ahead of the forum's start on Tuesday. It's a mammoth task for Tuvalu, population 11,000, its capital, Funafuti, a slither of an atoll just south of the equator. But Prime Minister Inele Sopoaga expects they'll be ready.
I think we have a big job to do this week, and the job is to review where we are, where do we want to go to, and how are we going to get there.
The main issue for Tuvalu at this forum will be climate change. The country's on the front line of it, its highest point 4 metres high, its narrowest point not much more. Thursday's leaders' retreat, which will include New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern and Australia's Scott Morrison, will be hosted not far from the causeway, which is regularly washed over by high tides, in view of a coast being nibbled by the sea. The forum's Secretary-General, Dame Meg Taylor, says serious questions will have to be answered and bold commitments made.
I think that we're at a real crossroads in terms of the impact of climate in this region, and our leaders know that, of course, and they will speak to it. Many of our Prime Ministers and Presidents have spoken out very strongly. When you think of the future, you've got to think seriously, what kind of a future are we leaving?
And that's likely to bring some heat on Ms Ardern and mostly Mr Morrison. Australia's been in the firing line of several Pacific leaders in recent months. At a recent meeting in Fiji, leaders called for an end to coal and for it to avoid trying to water down climate commitments, as happened at last year's forum. Australia is in the midst of its Pacific step-up, like New Zealand's reset. But Mr Sopoaga says that's meaningless without climate action.
Regardless of how much money you do in the step-up policy, it doesn't mean anything. Why? Because you are helping to have serious implications on your own people who are living in Tuvalu, Kiribati. I think we need to bring these people connections more visible to the leaders.
But Mr Morrison and large delegations from the US, China, Britain, Europe and nearly everywhere else will be here trying to swing their geopolitical concerns. For Australia and the US, security is their big pitch as part of their geopolitical tussle with China. Tuvalu is also one of the few states that still recognises Taiwan, and both Beijing and Taipei are here and could cause a stir. Also back is Fiji's Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, for his first forum in 12 years. Fiji was suspended after the constitution was abrogated in 2009, but after it was returned, he refused to come, critical of Australia and New Zealand's outsized influence. But what does all this hubbub in Funafuti mean for the hordes of locals who come to greet every plane that buzzes in? Escaping the searing equatorial heat in a hammock on Sunday afternoon was 14-year-old Sungale Koveu. What did she want?
I hope they will take them with them when they're back home. Remembering of the forum, especially for the children's future.
We'll know whether that's the case by the end of the week. In Funafuti, ko Jamie Tahana tēnei.
Wellington's recalcitrant little blue penguins seem to have moved on from sushi to burgers. 2 penguins were spotted shortly after midnight opposite the Wellington train station in a parking building above McDonald's. Doc says due to a band spotted on one of them, it is likely that they were the same pair found in the sushi store 2 weeks ago. Now, the penguins had been released in Days Bay across the harbour, but as Ranger Brent Tandy told Charlotte Cook, they may have to be released much further away to keep them from wandering into the big smoke once again.
the penguins had wandered up apparently to the first floor car park, so maybe up a ramp to the car parking building. And there was a little crowd of people gathered there that had sort of cornered the birds so that they couldn't run away, and basically scooped them up, put a towel over them and put them into a cage, and took them down to Frankitts Park and released them there in the lagoon. And they swam off happily. So whether or not that's the last we see of them or not is another story, but for the meantime they're safely back at sea.
They like to keep coming back. What's the plan now if they continue to return? What can we do?
They're obviously quite tenacious and quite keen to find a nesting site, most likely somewhere around that area. So chances are they'll turn up again, and if we can catch them second time or next time around, the rough plan I think will most likely be that we have to relocate them further away. Maybe somewhere up the Kapiti coast to where we know that there are other penguin breeding sites, and in the hope that that's far enough away that they'll just say, okay, we'll set up shop here and won't bother with Wellington. They prospect areas quite intensively, penguins, and they'll check every nook and cranny and test out where they can come, where they can turn up, all in the search for a nesting site, and that's what these birds are probably doing. The fact that there's always two of them probably indicates they haven't set up a nest yet, and they're looking for a site to start breeding.
That's Dock Ranger Brent Tandy speaking to reporter Charlotte Cook. Let's get quickly to some of your feedback before we go. On Southern Response being wound up by the end of the year, this person says, so my as yet unsettled claim with Southern Response may go to EQC if it is not resolved by December. EQC, who mismanaged our repair through a lack of scoping and inadequate repairs by Fletchers, leading to our claim being deemed overcap and passed to Southern Response. Feels frighteningly circular, this person says. Alison has got in contact too to say the key consideration regarding Southern Response winding up is that the staff who have blocked progress and caused such a hellish time for people over the years do not go to either EQC or Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service. That would be madness, says Alison. On Fonterra, Bill has been in touch saying Fonterra has spent millions of dollars employing foreign CEOs and all they have created is this disastrous present situation. And Bill reckons, when will companies learn that you don't have to go overseas to find a competent CEO? And my favourite bit of feedback for the day about trampolines. There was a trampoline that flew around during one of these tornadoes in the last 24 hours. Phil has said, when are councils going to make it mandatory to anchor down trampolines? That dude said it came from nowhere. No, it didn't, he says. It came from a lazy person's backyard. Catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Junior doctors' lengthy industrial dispute has ended with an agreement with DHBs that the doctors' interests will be protected in future. A man who murdered a 52-year-old woman in Wellington told police he had intended to incapacitate her so he could sexually assault her 12-year-old daughter. The Labour Party members who complained about bullying and harassment will be allowed to appeal against the findings of an internal investigation. The Justice Minister says he would prefer to limit the right of prisoners to vote to those with a sentence of less than 3 years. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
12 months ago, we were receiving about 150 people per day into the emergency department. We thought that was really busy.